best advice?
Just like your mother warned you, to be careful about who your friends are, you need to be careful about who is in your network, because there are people who either knowingly or unknowingly promote myths such as learning styles or generational differences. Build your network, scrutinize your network to see who's got valid concepts and methods, and then learn from them.
Welcome to the Rogue L&D Hot Shots podcast, a short podcast allowing you to meet some of the brilliant folk driving people performance and development forward in an informal and human way. My name's Tom Bailey, award-winning L&D leader and passionate maverick for all things development. Join me as I ask just 10 questions of some of the industry's most innovative and interesting people. Tell us about yourself.
Well, hello. Thank you, Tom, for inviting me to do this. My name is Guy Wallace. I've been in the learning and development profession since it was called training and development. I started way back in 1979. I got a radio, TV, film degree, and I went to work for the employer that I was working for as a part-time college student. And I went off to their headquarters after I got my degree in radio, TV, film, and I joined their training services department. It was 10 people. There was somebody there named Guy already, which is quite unusual. So he was Guy 1, I was Guy 2. And I was oriented by my boss and coworker, who had been there 2 weeks longer than I was, to the work of Gary Rumler and Tom Gilbert in particular, and some others. I spent about 20 months there, and then my wife got transferred to the suburbs of Chicago, and so I left Saginaw, Michigan, and moved to Chicago. I joined Motorola, where I got a chance to work with Gary Rumler. He was my consultant, and the joke was that meant I carried his pencils around as we went from client site to client site. And so I got a chance to really learn from him in lots of discussions at breakfasts and dinners as we were out of town traveling to all of my client sites across North America. I did that for about 20 months, and then I went to a small consulting firm, and I was the third consultant, the founder, and my wife was already working there. And we had two other staff people that did the word processing and the office administration kinds of things. And I was asked to start a training practice area. So I started to document my methods and define the tools and the techniques that we were going to use. And I hired staff, and I used local subcontractors that I'd met when I was at Motorola. And so that began in 1982, in November 1982. And so I spent 41 years as a consultant. I served 83 clients, over 45 Fortune 500 companies, and I worked with NASA and other government agencies as well. My work has won awards. Me and my team have won awards at AT&T and Change Healthcare, General Motors, Hewlett-Packard, Imperial Oil, and Siemens Building Technologies. It's all due to the fact that I was initially oriented, no kidding, on day one to a performance-based approach to instruction or training or learning. And I was just darn lucky to be in that position and to have the opportunities that I've had, and just a very lucky guy, if you will.
What are you passionate about?
In my retirement here now, I'm really focused on helping learning and development organizations, leaders, and practitioners become more performance-based. So what are the philosophies and processes and practices that one might adopt or adapt into their own practice that's appropriate for their context? And that's really what I'm all about nowadays.
What's the best L&D you've seen?
All right, so I've given that some thought, and it was my 5 months at DINFOS, which is the Defense Information School. It was part of the Department of Defense of the U.S. military. It was an all-service school, so there were Marines and sailors and people from the Air Force and Army and Coast Guard and some 3-letter organizations that they would joke if we told you what that was, we would have to kill you. But it was for information officers and their staff, and I was enlisted in the Navy, and so I went and took and graduated from a print journalism course and a broadcast journalism course, and it was hands-on. We didn't spend a lot of time in lectures or seeing somebody else do it. We were just thrown in there and given feedback. If you've ever seen the movie Good Morning Vietnam with Robin Williams, and the person that he worked for, the mean SOB that he worked for, well, I had several of those in this course, in these courses, and they really were there to hone your capabilities. So I learned radio broadcasting and television broadcasting, and I learned how to do what would be a ship's newspaper or a Navy base's newspaper, and how to do the layup, do the photojournalism, write articles, write headlines, all of that kind of stuff. And it was really hands-on. And in an amazing short amount of time, I really developed some critical skill sets. And then I went off to my ship, and my job was different than most of the people that I had been in this DINFOS training. But I was able to take what I had learned and apply it to that particular context with my job. And so it was a huge experience. And so it's funny that I worked with somebody at Motorola, and 30 years after we had worked together at Motorola, I found out that he had been in that same program. And we spent an afternoon reminiscing about it and how hands-on it was and how skilled we became so quickly. But anyway, so that was the best thing. And I think that's one of the things I took into the learning and development profession way after the Navy, is that, that hands-on, getting in there with authentic practice. You're not practicing somebody else's job. You're practicing something that's your job explicitly or close enough that you'll be able to go back out to the job and apply what you've learned, because you've really honed a skill here. You've been given that feedback, that reinforcing feedback and that corrective feedback that really shaped your capabilities.
Favorite hand gesture?
All right, so I've got two things I want to talk about here. So the first one is the salute. And I would tell clients when they would make a request, I would say, well, I'm saluting you here, and I, demonstratively saluting here. And so I'd say, I will do what you're asking me to do, but I would not do it if it were me. So let me get out of my way and let me get on with it. And some clients, of course, like that. Just go do what I just told you to do. Other clients would say, well, hold on there a minute. What do you mean you wouldn't do that? And if I built a trusting relationship with them, or I had a reputation that preceded me, because I got internal references in some of these companies here, and so you came highly recommended, so they would maybe listen to me, and I would have a shot at having them look at their situation a little bit differently and talk about what they were asking me to do and whether or not that was going to be successful. So sometimes it was a check the box exercise, so they need to get something done and get on with, the rest of their job. But other times they were really trying to make an improvement or deal with a situation and turn it around. And so I got a lot. So this, saluting but the other gesture that I wanted to talk about was a head nod. So I spent my career doing what I call a facilitated group process, where I'd bring in master performers, other subject matter experts, supervisors, and sometimes newer performers into analysis team meetings or design team meetings. And I had this rule. I'm going to ask a bunch of questions. I own the process, you own the data. I've got the questions, you're going to give me the answer. So I'm going to ask this question. The first person that answers me, I'm not going to stand there with my pen and, because that sends a signal that maybe that wasn't right. So, and I would tell the groups this, so I don't want to do that. So you say something, I'm going to write it down. And then I'm going to turn back to the group, and I'm going to do face polling. I'm going to look into each and every one of your faces to see if you concur or not with what I just captured. And you can help me out by nodding up and down if you agree, or nodding sideways if you don't agree. And if you're not sure, nod your head diagonally. And that would get a laugh and it would loosen up the group. But I needed them to understand that I have a process here. It's a proven process. I don't have the data. I would tell Bill, you could all lie to me. You could agree at breakfast. Hey, let's just take Guy on this wild ride and lie to him and tell him all these, nonsense things. And he'll write it down and believe it, because what does he know? He didn't do this job for a living. And so that was my situation. I was a facilitator tapping into the expertise and the knowledge of a group. And I would even have to encourage people to disagree with each other, but do it in a gentle manner. So you didn't say, Guy, you stupid idiot. That's not right. So what, and I would tell people, when Joe says, Guy, you stupid idiot, that's not right. What he's really trying to say is, Guy, I think we need to look at this from another perspective. And the group would laugh and all that stuff. So I needed to keep the group loose so that they'd be willing to contribute what they knew. And even if it was different from the person next to them, because let's face it, only rote performance is the same each and every time. So all these people came from different performance contexts, different clients, different facilities or whatever, and they needed to get the job done. So they were dealing with all these situational variables in the performance context. And one of the things that I learned was that sometimes there's more than one way to get something done, and they're both equally good, other than if they were in the wrong situation. So those were my gestures. So the salute and then the whole head nodding thing, which always became a joke, and people would answer each other with the diagonal because I don't know what the heck you're talking about, Guy.
One thing you didn't learn.
One thing I didn't learn formally, and I learned informally, this goes way back in the day to the early 1960s, when I was 10 and 11 years old. And I had a newspaper route, and I delivered 68 newspapers 7 days a week.
Nice.
And my mother got me a new bicycle for this. She had signed me up for this. This wasn't my idea. And I had to put on the tall handlebars, the big handlebars, and because the newspaper bag fit on that better than the lower standard handlebars. So I had to change the handlebars out, and I didn't know how to do that, but I did it. And I had to put lights on because sometimes it was early mornings on Sundays and late at night in the evenings and in the dark. And so I had to have lights on my bike. And I had to put a carrier on the back over the back tire for the bag that fit over the back, because the 68 newspapers takes up a lot of room, especially on Sundays. And but I had to learn all of that myself. So I was what we would call a shade tree mechanic as a kid, working on my bicycle to keep it in shape. So the chain would break or something would happen. You'd have to know how to fix that thing to finish the job and get all those newspapers delivered on time. Because if I didn't have that Sunday newspaper at everybody's house by 7 a.m., the office got called and they would send somebody out in a car to try to figure out what the heck was my problem.
Proudest moment.
So I had a client back in 1986, AT&T Network Systems, and this was the old Western Electric part of AT&T, the manufacturing, where they made all the stuff that created the telephone system. And I was working with the product management group. They had been told by McKinsey that they didn't really have a product management group, and this was just after the monopoly of AT&T was ended by the U.S. Justice Department. So now they were going to have to compete. The good news was nobody knew how to compete with them, and so they had a window of 2-3 years before they would actually have competitors. But they were told, you don't have product managers, you have product expediters in the factory trying to hurry things along. And so you needed to professionalize this group. Well, I won the project, my company won the project, and so my two business partners and myself did the analysis for what does a product manager do? And there were 800 people in this organization across 4 business sectors, soon to be 5 business sectors with 1,100 people, and everybody's job was different. And I had people that were 2-3 years into the jobs asking me, Did what I tell you, is that what everybody else is telling you? Because when I look around the cube farm here and what everybody else is doing,
I'm not doing any of that. I don't know if my boss knows what I'm supposed to be doing, whether they're a good boss or not. It's like everybody's job is different here. That really struck me. But anyway, so I developed a curriculum architecture with, that's basically creates learning paths. But we had this big giant marketing poster and said, here's all the courses in a suggested sequence. And you would go through a planning exercise and pull down the things that you really needed for your job and then sequence them so that it was timely for you and your boss and your part of the business. And the Keystone course was at the end of the first phase of modular curricula, if you will. And it was an 8-day course. And I created this 8-day course, and it had 5 rounds of simulation that matched the life cycle stages or phases that the company was using. And there were 20 people in each class and divided into 2 groups of 10. And so you and a partner would be the product managers running a product team meeting, and there'd be 2 people representing the labs, Bell Labs, and 2 people representing manufacturing, and 2 people representing sales, and 2 people representing services and the installation groups. And you would run a team meeting, and they would have data packs and information, and you would have to figure out, so what are you going to be able to, how many are you going to be able to sell next year at this price or that price? And Bell Labs would say, oh, we're going to put these feature sets in there. And then manufacturing says, well, that means our costs are going to go up. And that means your margin is going to go down unless you raise the price. And then sales would complain, well, you can't raise the price on me. I can't sell as many now. And service would go, how do we learn how to install this newfangled stuff? So you as a participant would go through 25 product team meetings. You would sit in every chair, so you would begin to learn what are the issues in this phase versus that phase of the life cycle. Introducing a new product and ramping it up is different than growth and maturity or when you're in decline and you're going to discontinue the product. And so this was an 8-day course, and 60% of it was hands-on exercises. Well, I delivered this course 31 times for my client. It's the only course I ever delivered because I don't, do that. But they encouraged me to do that by promising me more business, so I did it. And this was in 87. I created it, and we pilot tested it at the end of the year. And then a year and a half later, they asked me to take this to the Netherlands, to their international operations in Europe. And so I went over there. I met with the clients. They go, 8 days, come on, you got to be kidding. And but they agreed that we could pilot test it. And so I went back and I did the 8-day delivery. And then the managers, the product management managers, assembled everybody that had gone through the 8-day course, and myself and my client who was there trying to make sure that they didn't destroy what we were doing. And the goal of the meeting was, how do we reduce this to 5 or 3 days? Well, all of the students, there was a screaming match, and people were screaming at their bosses or somebody else's bosses saying, we don't want you to do that. We really learned how to do the job, how to think about it, how to structure it, how to run these meetings with all these other functions that we have no control over, yet we're responsible for what we collectively do. And so the managers then reluctantly agreed, oh, okay, you can do the 8-day course. We hate it, but we'll let you do it. And so I delivered it 5 more times. And I was very proud of listening to the participants who had just gone through this. And I had asked that in the pilot test that we have people with a lot of experience, half the class, 10 people with lots of experience, people who have been in the business, 5, 10, 20 years doing this job. And then other people who were really brand new because they represented the target audience. And I said, I need to see if we can have people learn things. And I can do that with the target audience members, but with the old guard, I can't, they can't learn anything. Theoretically, they know it already. Now, is what we're teaching accurate, complete, and appropriate? Well, the new people can't tell me any of that, but the old people can. So I needed both groups. And so I was successful at getting the right participants in this pilot session. And when both groups insisted to their management that they not touch this, they leave it alone. We want exactly the same thing that's being delivered back in the States. And
I don't. That was we won an award at NSPI, which is now ISPI, for this project because the CFO organization had calculated that we had a 487% return on investment.
Wow.
And I don't know how CFO organizations calculate that and how they really did it, but they sanctioned our number that we used in our submission for this award.
Phenomenal.
And so it was just very impactful, and I was so proud of the fact that these people were going to get into screaming matches with their bosses, with their manager's boss, and stand firm on, because it was all about the practice with feedback. And there was so much of that. You really hone the skill. It wasn't just tell them and maybe show them, or just tell them and they'll figure it out. It was really, okay, now let's go apply what we just heard about.
Worst experience in L&D?
So I was working at Motorola, and my clients were the manufacturing, material, and purchasing organizations, and I was asked to create a course using it was the corporate subject matter expert, that was on his business card, for purchasing. Well, so I had tried to convince them to let me go out and do, some research out in the field and talk to other purchasing agents and all. Oh no, the Global Purchasing Council decided. The Global Purchasing Council decided that no, just work with this guy here and he'll get such on. So I did it. We created the course. He delivered it. It was a total bomb. The feedback was terrible. We got ripped to shreds. At the next Global Purchasing Council meeting, I was there and I said, I've got the data from the feedback, and they'd already heard. They knew it was a terrible bomb. And they ripped into the corporate subject matter expert, because he was the face of the course, because he was standing up and, all I did was pretty up the slides or whatever they thought. And so they were ripping into him, and I stood up and I said, no, the fault for this is me. It's on me. And they argued, no, it's not, and they wanted to argue, and I kept on arguing with them. No, it's me. So I took all the blame and channeled it to me. And I said, and I'll take the hit on this thing here, but let's quit talking about who to blame. Let's figure out how we're going to fix this. And the clients kind of sat back, and there were a number of them in the room, and they sat back, and once they realized that I was on their side and trying to make this impactful to new purchasing agents so they could survive, reducing turnover, et cetera, and mistakes, so that was a huge win for me by shifting that over. And I said, I asked for you at the very beginning. So I turned this around and then, beat him up with this. I said, I asked you originally to let me talk to real purchasing agents and their supervisors out in the facilities. There were 30 some facilities. I said, you need to pick which ones I need to go to and all of that. And let me talk to them. And I'm going to build a model of performance for what this job is. And then we're going to develop training to train people on how to do that, rather than just rely on some corp. So one of the things I found out in that meeting was that the corporate SME had been 7 years out of the field and up at headquarters. And back in the day, the joke was, oh, you're from headquarters, you're here to help. You can help us best by leaving right now. And nobody wants help from headquarters. And the guy was 7 years out of the field. So everything that he knew was 7 years out of date, and the world was changing. There was MRP and MRP2, which later became ERP systems, and computers were coming in, and how to reduce your number of parts in materials. There was a whole bunch of things going on at Motorola at the time to reduce costs and to compete with their Japanese competitors in particular. But anyway, so that was the thing. It was a total bomb. And I had somehow learned that, rather than let this go on where somebody else is getting beat up, just stand up and take the bullets and let's get on with it. And that won a lot of respect for me from those people, and they started to listen to me when I had something to say. And the session that we delivered, the second pilot, if you will, was a huge success because we were focused on the performance of people and not just a whole bunch of topics, which is what the first course had been.
Best celebrity moment?
I have very few, but this one is kind of funny. So my client, MCC Powers, which is now Siemens Building Technologies, held their annual managers meeting in the suburbs of Chicago. And my clients in the training organization asked me to come to this management meeting because they were going to have side meetings where they were going to meet with people who were requesting training, and they wanted me to be in the room to help understand, the context, what's going on, what was at the root of that request, etc. So I go there one year. This is the early '90s. So I go drive, an hour and a half across Chicagoland and go to the hotel and go get on the elevator, and there's Joe Theismann, an NFL National Football League quarterback. Had just maybe 5 years earlier been to 2 Super Bowls, won one of them, and there he was. And he's a huge guy. But anyway, so I was quiet and just got on the elevator, and we went up to the floor where this management meeting, and he was a motivational speaker for them, and they loved him so much they brought him back the next year. Well, the next year, my clients asked me to come back and meet again with their clients. And so I enter the hotel, get in the elevator bank, and there's Joe Theismann again. And I said to him, we're going to have to stop meeting like this. And he didn't, he gave me a quizzical look or whatever, and I said, last year you spoke to the same group here, and I got on the elevator and you were there, and we rode up to the whatever floor it was, and so here we are doing this again. And he kind of chuckled, and we got off the elevator and all that. But I really didn't have any kind of extended conversation with him, right. but that was as close as I got to somebody who in the United States was pretty familiar, at least to the male-dominated clients that I worked with.
Something not many people know about you.
So back in 8th grade, I was a child model. And my stepmother had gotten me into this. I have a half-brother who was a child model, and when he was 5 years old, 6 years old, and I'm 12, 13 years old, and she convinced me to go do this. So we'd go into Chicago to Old Town, where all the hip and happening things were, the beatniks before the hippies, and that's where all the photographers were in the photography studios. And so we'd go down there, and I get to experience some of that. But I had one job that was really successful, and I was in the 1965 J.C. Penney's Christmas catalog, and I was James Bond. And I was in a tuxedo with a boutonniere, and I was carrying the attaché case, and I had one of the James Bond guns in my hand, and, it was for the James Bond 007 attaché case, $8.88 back in the day. And, but anyway, so that was but then I didn't like doing it, and so I convinced my stepmother to, not take me on all these photo shoots and all these cattle calls and things like that.
Best advice.
So I think it's important to establish your professional network, and network with your network's network. But just like your mother warned you, to be careful about who your friends are, you need to be careful about who is in your network, because there are people who either knowingly or unknowingly promote myths, such as learning styles or generational differences and things like that. And so it's important really to, build your network, scrutinize your network to see who's got valid concepts and methods and tools and techniques, has been there and done that, and then learn from them. And so part 2 of that is that, and I tell groups, I've been doing this my entire career. Adopt what you can and adapt the rest. And lately I've been saying, and there's times when you need to reject things because it's not appropriate for you and your context, or you've already got one, thank you very much, and so you don't need anything new. But when you go to conferences and you read articles or see videos and all that stuff, there are things that you might be able to adopt as is and retrofit that into your practices. And there's other times when you have to take something and you have to adapt it, the language, the imagery, or whatever, to make it fit your set of practices and processes. And that's, again, that kind of goes to the name proliferation of why so many things are called different things here. But I would always speak to the language of my clients. And if they called
If they called their product development process Addy, then I would call it Addy. But if they called it something else, or if they had different phases or stages or whatever they use, I would change everything to fit what they were using so that it would become more familiar to them. And they would understand, oh, you call it analysis, we call it customer requirements. Yeah, we're trying to pin those things down. Yeah, same thing. But, I can call it customer requirement. And I've had clients who've said, no, call it analysis. That's good, because that's what customer requirements people are trying to do. They're trying to figure out what are the customer requirements so we can build a prototype and price it and blah, blah, blah. And so to see the parallels between what we're doing, but always default to the language of your clients, your customers. They're not interested in learning our language, our models, our methods. They, quite frankly, don't care unless you're extremely successful and they really love what you did. Then they want to know, how is it that you made the sausage? And now they want to know, because maybe they can learn from you and bring that to their world. Yeah. And so don't push our language and our jargon. Use the jargon at the conferences and things like that, but in your backyard, at home, at work, use the language that is currently in vogue.
Thank you to our guest and to you for listening. If you want to boost the impact of your organization's people development practices, I'd love to connect. You can find me at thomasbailey.co. Alternatively, you can look me up on LinkedIn.